our reward in heaven. And all this hard labor that we do here on earth, it's sweat and it is toil. But what is heaven called? It's called a place of rest. Our work is here on earth. Heaven is a place of rest. And this psalm, the Psalms 126, it talks about these times where, yes, we do go through hard times. But what is our focus supposed to be on? Our focus is supposed to be on God and what He has for us in the future. This life is just temporary. That captivity was just 70 years. Yes, it seemed like forever, and it seemed like a dream going back. But God blessed them. When they sowed in tears, they reaped in joy. And it continues on in Psalms 127. This one we have an author for. A song of ascents of, what does it say? Solomon. This is the second psalm that we have that was written by Solomon. And this psalm is full of practical advice on family life, on being a man of God in the family. And it starts off with a contrast between two different types of people. A person who works and labors for themselves. A man who works and labors just for his own pleasure, just for what he wants, thinking he can do everything by himself, like all of us have tried. And like our tendency is to do. We want to do it ourselves. And then it's contrasted in the second part, 3 through 6, on a person who trusts in God. So the first two verses talk about a person who doesn't trust in God. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for He gives to His beloved even in His sleep. This is absolute. I mean, you can work and work and work and work and work from morning, and even from what this verse says, from the rising of the sun until the setting of the sun. But if your labor is just for yourself, it's in vain. And you see that over and over and over again in your friends' life and other people's lives. You see that. Maybe even in your own life you've seen it. Well, what happens to that paycheck that you worked so hard for? I mean, literally it just disappears. Why? Why does it just disappear like that? What happens when we don't trust in the Lord? Everything we do is vain. And you get the same theme in Ecclesiastes. It has that same theme in it, written by the same person, Solomon, in the later years of his life. And so most people think this was also written in the later years of his life. Looking back on his life, realizing that he did exactly the same thing. This man who was given the wisdom of God, wiser than any person on the face of the earth, tried it all. He tried it all. Everything that he could pleasure himself with that was on this earth, he tried. And he realized that it was vanity of vanities. That you can work all day for everything that this life has to offer, and if you're not doing it for God, what is it? It's just vanity. Because what's going to happen to it? You're going to die, and nothing's going to be accomplished by it. It starts off, unless the Lord builds the house. Who has to build our foundation? Who has to? It's God. It all starts with God. It always starts with God. They labor in vain who build it. This picture of a house being built with just human ingenuity, with just human hands, and God's not in it. They labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. Is it good to build a house? Yes. Is it good to watch a city? Yes. But if God's not there, it's all vanity. It's all just a waste of time. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors. Why is that? Because God's not, if God's not in it, all you're doing is just working. That's all you're doing. It just produces temporary results, right? The results are just here for this life. Is it good to work? Yes, and we're going to find that out later on. Yes, it is important to work, but what do we work for? That's the question. What are we working for? Why do we have a family? Why do we have a city? Why do we work and go to work? Is it just to get things here on this earth? No. It's for God and His glory. It's for what God wants for us. It starts always with God doing the work in us. Verse 2, at the end of verse 2, I love this. For He gives to His beloved even in his sleep. When we trust in God, God works behind the scenes, even when we're dead tired. Even when we need to sleep, God works behind the scenes. And you've seen it in your life. I mean, a miracle happens, and you did nothing. And you did nothing to deserve it. And that's God working behind the scenes. Verse 3, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. This verse talks about the joy of children. So often, though, we think of children as a burden, right? Unfortunately, especially men, unfortunately. I have to watch the kids today. Don't get to go do whatever I want, golfing or what. I have to watch the kids today. My wife's making me watch the kids today. No, they're a gift of the Lord, right? They're a gift from God. And what does it say? The fruit of the womb is a reward. And it goes on to continue painting these amazing pictures of what children are like. Verse 4. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. You think of these arrows. They have characteristics. You probably chose them out yourself. You probably took time making sure they were straight. The warrior in this has this quiver full of arrows, and these arrows were practiced with. These arrows were used. These arrows were fashioned. These arrows were checked out. And it's the same thing with our children, right? We need to raise them properly. There's another aspect of arrows too, also. They're used. They're not just kept in a shed somewhere. They're used. They need to be exercised. They need to be practiced with. And the same thing with our children, right? They need to be. They need to have discipline in their lives. They need to experience the work of this world. They need to be disciplined. They need to be shown in a family protected environment. The love of God, right? But then what also happens once you pull back, once that arrow is taken out of the quiver and used in battle, what is it done? It's released, right? And what are we releasing it to do? And it goes on in this verse, and it tells us these answers. But it's released in battle. It's used as practice, and then it's released in battle. Why? so it can be used, right? And the same thing with our children. We need to release them as well. It continues on. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They shall not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. How many times have you talked with a friend who says, my son is no longer following the Lord. My son is addicted to gambling. My son is addicted to alcohol. My son is living on the street. And what happens? There's literally shame in their voice. Why? Because that child was theirs and it wasn't used properly. It wasn't trained properly. Something happened. It went astray. It wasn't a straight arrow. What happens when you talk with someone who has a son or a child that they're proud of? What happens to their voice? What happens to their face? There's a glow. There's pride in that voice. What do they want to do? They want to talk about their children. Why? Because they're from their seed, right? They're their children. And I am proud to talk of my child. Why? Because I helped raise them. They're my son, right? And they have that glow about them. They're glad that they're their children. They're glad that they're part of their quiver. They're glad that they're their arrow that they released. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. This idea of children being arrows, a quiver full of them. Why? Because God has something special for every single child that He's given to us. And you get to be part of it. If you raise a child, if you have a child, you get to be part of that child's life. And it is our responsibility as men to help raise them, to instill in them that desire. And it's not just a pacifistic lifestyle. What is it talking about here? It's talking about war. It is literally spiritual warfare that is going on here. When we don't train our sons and our daughters for that, then what happens? They succumb to the wiles of the devil and they go astray as well. That arrow, it no longer shoots straight, it goes off its course. Sin is also like that. Sin is an archery term. It means hitting or missing the mark. When we hit the mark, when we do what God tells us to do with this arrow, what happens? We are following God's will. What happens if we miss the mark? We are what? We are sinning. This whole idea, even in Ephesians chapter 6, talks of warfare, putting on the armor of God. And that's right after family life and work life. Exactly in that same section. Why? Because there's spiritual warfare in raising a family. Because why? Because Satan wants your kids. He wants those arrows. He wants to use those arrows for his purposes. And this is why God over and over and over again tells us, when you are sitting down, when you are laying down, when you're walking, whatever you are doing, tell these things to your children. This is why I brought up Luke chapter 2, 39 through 42 at the very beginning. Why? Jesus was 12 years old and they're walking on the way to Jerusalem from Nazareth. And what are they doing? They're singing these songs.